In general, transitions are about a system change that is hard to imagine. So it's a complete change in the way that we live and the way that we produce and consume. And most people just stick to what is already here and try to make it better. And what we've seen through history is that process is part of the problem. It's often referred to as sustainable development, make the existing better. To make a quantum leap forward and to address really the sustainability problems that we have ecologically and socially, we really need imagination. But we need imagination in a different way. So it's not autonomous imagination that artists are so good at. It's also not architecture of the past. So just commissioned by money and power, build more stuff. But it's the imagination that helps us to break free of our current growth economy. So imagine cities for people without private cars. Imagine a food system without animals. And it's about what that would look like spatially, but also what it looks like institutionally, behaviorally. So we need designers of all sorts, spatial designers, architects, artists, but also social scientists, to help imagining the radical transitions that we need. In general, transitions are going against the mainstream and the status quo, hence also the vested interests. And throughout history we see that those established regimes, as we call them, become inert, path-dependent and resist change while society around us changes. And social movements and social innovators, social entrepreneurs, they pick up these early signals of unsustainability, of persistent problems, and they start to mobilize. They mobilize alternatives, but they also mobilize critical mass that is eventually needed to push established institutions or political parties up to a point that they have to decide in favor of the alternative and radical transitions. So social movements are critical, both organized protest against fossil fuel industry or against nepotism or corruption or political institutions, but also social movement in terms of people just doing things differently against the unsustainable mainstream. The concept of a regime just refers to the dominant state within a social system. So these states can be populist, authoritarian, dictatorial, or just bureaucratic. And the historical logic is that those regimes become inert and people are also free individuals, and the ones that have ideals or money or time or guts, they will start to go against the mainstream, whatever that mainstream is, and over time they can build this critical mass. So transitions as we use it are processes where this interplay between regimes that resist change and growing a critical mass of alternatives eventually pushes a regime out of equilibrium. And we now talk a lot about transitions that we want. We have to see how it plays out, because bureaucracies and autocratic regimes are also very resilient. They have the power and the money to resist change for a very long time, so the critical mass also needs to be very powerful. Protests at Erasmus University, they were a group of students demanding more transparency about fossil fuel ties of the university and a more radical action on climate change, amongst other demands. and sort of the very forceful response of the university board, they sent in the riot police to drag them out, was picked up as a signal also by the academic community of what we don't want. It's basically a symbol of a regime that doesn't want to change. The board had all sorts of arguments. It was not about the freedom of speech, but it was about safety concerns. They said they had, but it was also a situation where our university doesn't have a lot of history of protest. So it was also just incompetence and a situation where the board didn't know how to respond, and they responded in a clearly wrong way. What we did with staff, but also with students, we mobilized, and we took this also as an opportunity for transformation at our university. So we pushed the board, and we discussed with them, and we helped them to formulate concrete responses. So only a week after, they announced they will make the ties of the university with fossil fuel industry transparent. They supported the students and the aftermath and the impact it had on them. And next week we will have a dialogue with the board and with the academic community on next steps, because obviously transparency is one, but next steps would be to actually transform our university and our education much more to align with sustainability and justice goals and values. And there's still a very long way to go, but we now see that the protest actually worked to start an irreversible process away from the dominant regime in our university, which is really about economics and business and, let's say, traditional growth.
Thank you very much for your answer.
You're welcome.